Hello, everyone. I am Ramya Mohanakrishnan, currently working in TIQ India office as the Principal Business Development Manager, looking after the Study Queensland initiatives in India. It is my privilege to welcome all of you to this Study Queensland Global Webinar Series on the market updates of education sector in India. So before going ahead, let me just quickly update you, take you through the housekeeping notes. The microphones are muted. The sessions will be recorded, and please type in your questions to the panelists in the Q&A box. I take the privilege of introducing you and welcoming our guest panelist. Along with our Trade Commissioner, Mr. Geetesh Agarwal, we have an esteemed panel of experts, Mrs. Lakshmi Iyer, Executive Director, Sannam S4, Mr. Jason Newman, Vice President, QS Global, and Mr. Ravi Lochan Singh, President, AIRI, and Managing Director, Global Reach, along with us, who are wearing many hats and have kindly agreed to give their market insights on how international education has changed in the COVID-19 scenario. What are the potential opportunities, the challenges that we have, and what is the way forward? So each of the panelists will have around 10 minutes to express their views, and after which Geetesh, we will be asking 2 questions to the panelist. And so if any questions arise in your mind while they are talking, please feel free to type them in the Q&A chat box. Geetesh Agarwal, our Trade Commissioner, will be moderating this session, and he will be, now I leave it to Geetesh to take over. Over to you, Geetesh. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramya. Good morning, everyone. Let me just get my video on. Good morning, everyone. It's a complete circle of life. 26 years ago, I went to Australia as a student, and here I am, moderating a webinar on challenges that exist currently in front of the industry per se. Indian students have, as per a recent report, had almost a 134-year documented history of obtaining a foreign degree from Western nations. As all of you might agree, they constitute one of the world's largest groups of mobile post-secondary students, especially in the STEM. According to a recent report by the Ministry of External Affairs, Indian government, there are about 1 million Indians enrolled in foreign universities. The number of Indian students had been rising steadily, with Australia as the 4th or 5th most favored destination amongst Indian students. However, various random scenarios like post-study work, immigration policies, economic downturns, and of course now COVID has put a pause to that movement of students. COVID's a tsunami that's turned our world upside down. It's forced us to change the way we live, work, shop, play, entertain, and of course learn. Geography, they say, is history now. In the new name of Education 4.0, which is here to stay, until something else takes place as a disruption in technology, the online mode is breaking all barriers in terms of digital, demographic, and geographic divides. Many of the global universities are asking, how will we survive financially if the international students don't arrive in fall? But some are also asking, how can we help international students survive this crisis? The budget is also being impacted as rupee depreciates. The course fee goes high, the living and other costs inflate too. For students who want to plan their education through a loan, the rupee depreciation is leading to parents actually being advised to avoid compromising on other goals, especially their own retirements. The uncertainty around job losses because of economic impacts is also becoming a challenge. In such a scenario, we are so proud and happy to have brought an eclectic panel with us to maybe find some answers, some insights, and some thoughts on how can international education collaborate amidst these uncertain times, and what could be the way forward with India a country that Australia is deeply beginning to engage more and more as a natural partner. I would like to first introduce some thoughts around how COVID has impacted India. Ramya, may I ask you to put the next slide? The previous one, please. For our friends in Queensland, and we believe there are more than 100 registered participants, and more are joining in as we speak, the current COVID scenario in India, which went into one of the longest and most stringent lockdowns in the world, is that we are at about 440,000 cases. About 40% are active and about 60% have been discharged. The GDP definitely has been impacted. Economic contraction studies and ratings are being revised on a daily basis. However, with the lockdown 4 and the first version and the first phase of that, economy seems to be limping back in some states. The unemployment rate is, of course, at a very high. The positive aspects are that economy is bound to rebound once there seems to be some sort of a grip on COVID by vaccines or by cures. Next one, Ramya. The sectors that have been hit by COVID in India are similar to the world. Aviation, of course, with everything come to a pause, tourism and hospitality, realty and construction, the financial, the banking, the loans, the money movement, of course, MSMEs, which seem to be the backbone of most countries, and definitely education, especially the student mobility, and the fact that we are doing this webinar through a computer screen is exactly what's happening across screens, even in my own house, where my two daughters in 10th and 12th right now are doing their online school. The impact on the education industry has been absolutely a pause. In India, most of the institutions have remained closed since March 2020, and there seems to be no clarity or no consensus as to when they will open up for physical presence. Their partial online classes are on for students above the class of 7 and more. The board exams for higher secondary standard 10 and standard 12 are yet to be over. In fact, the Supreme Court is asking schools to pass the students based on their yearly assessments, and no exams could take place if COVID scenario continues in this format. University exams are pending for graduate students. All competitive exams are on hold currently, and there is a process of easing down on regulations, but the education sector may take some more time as parents, including us, are not confident of sending kids to physical school. Next one, Ramya. I would like to introduce our first panelist, Ms. Lakshmi Iyer, who is the Executive Director and Head of Education for Sannam S4. Ms. Iyer has been working in the education industry for over 18 years now and brings with her senior managerial experience to the table. Her passion for the sector is immense. She's been an active observer and commentator about the industry. She's been with Sannam S4 since 2011. Prior to Sannam S4, Ms. Iyer was associated with Studies Overseas Global, a leading education consultancy. She served in the company for 9 years, having been the head of Mumbai team and then managing the entire country. And post that, she moved on to head the UK operations. She's a DFID scholar. She has a master's in international marketing from UK, and she began her career in international education working in the student support office at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow. She has an extensive background of counseling for multiple countries and training and managing scores of counseling staff in her team. At Sannam S4, under Lakshmi's leadership, the education division now supports over 70 higher education clients from 8 countries. In the last 6 years, Lakshmi has been responsible for nurturing key relationships, which has enabled the division to expand the footprint to China and Southeast Asia, apart from India, LATAM, and the UAE. Lakshmi is a sought-after speaker at the leading higher education conferences, and she's an avid observer and commentator in the higher education space. Extremely respected in the social space for her LinkedIn and Twitter channels, and We are so happy that we'll be hearing from her today. Over to you, Lakshmi, for your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Gitesh, for inviting me to join this very esteemed panel. I'm really happy to kind of share some of the insights that have developed in a very dynamic situation over the last 3 months, of course, because India has been in a lockdown since March 24th. And as you rightfully said in your opening remarks, our world has turned upside down. But one thing that I can say with confidence about India is that we are resilient, and we are seeing, as elsewhere in the world, people adjusting very quickly to a new abnormal, as I call it, and are finding ways and means to cope with the situation. So I'm going to now share my screen, and I have got 6 slides, which basically captures some of the insights that we have developed as a team, because we are in a very privileged situation of supporting institutions across different geographies and can kind of bring those amalgamated kind of learnings to the fore for the benefit of a wider group. So when we went into the lockdown end of March, I started running a few sentiment surveys with the purpose of understanding how the ground situation is changing. So as a team within education, we are over 125 people, and we serve a wide range of agency partners across South Asia and predominantly in India. My colleagues are constantly in touch with students and parents. And there are a whole bunch of colleagues who are also in touch with educational institutions across the length and breadth of the country. So it was very important for us to understand how the sentiments of all of these different stakeholders were changing and are changing on a day-to-day basis. I think perhaps the biggest challenge of the times that we are living in is the fact that we all go to bed thinking that, okay, the situation is X, and then we wake up a few hours later to a completely different set of circumstances. And as human beings, we are all wired for a certain level of continuity and predictability in our routine. And that is what has been taken away from us as a result of COVID-19. So if you look at my slide, you will see that the predominant kind of sentiment across all of the different stakeholders is uncertainty. So on a weekly basis, we are monitoring what is happening on the ground through the network of our colleagues who are based across 5 cities in India. And we are also kind of in touch with our agency partners to see whether the findings that we are getting through our networks are mirroring what they are seeing, because obviously they are in touch with a whole host of students who are interested in multiple destinations. And as you can see, it is uncertainty across, and these are surveys that take place on a weekly basis. And over a period of time, what we have also seen is that week on week, the deferral and refund requests from students have just kind of shot up. So initially, as we went into the lockdown, the deferral requests were not coming through thick and fast. But what we are seeing is that students are wanting to take a pause and see how the situation is going to unfold. And of course, the uncertainty around the visa situation has also sort of spooked students and parents. Obviously, the Canadians were the first off the mark to give some amount of clarity to students as to how the post-study work scenario will unfold if they were to start a program online in India. And now we have the British UKVI saying that, okay, any student who gets to the UK before April 21st will still manage to retain their post-study work rights. So these are very, very important considerations from the perspective of Indian students, as you can imagine, who are very, very focused on return on investment. So I just want to kind of take a bit of time to walk you through what we have seen through the age and sentiment survey that we have rolled out. And these happen once a fortnight. So we have just completed 5 fortnights of this. And the interesting thing is that consistently, they are also receiving queries around whether a program will start online. And those queries have just gone up as the pandemic has marched across India and we have been in lockdown. Deferral requests have come in thick and fast to our agency partners. There are a lot of queries and concerns around visa situation, which they are tackling on behalf of the institutions that they represent. And predominantly around the COVID preparedness of the institution and also of the country. Obviously, from a country perspective, we are all reading, online news, and those of us who have started getting newspapers, we are reading frontline headlines in terms of how different countries are managing or not managing to deal with the pandemic. And interestingly, some of the suggestions that that have come from the university agents in terms of the kind of help that they need are largely around quick and regular updates from the institution, webinars to help and support the staff members in terms of their knowledge and training and so on. And in the spider graph that you can see on the right-hand side of my screen, you will see how these various kind of requests have shifted across the different fortnights that we have run the survey. So basically, what we are seeing through our network of institutions, that is being mirrored in what we are hearing back from our agency partners as well. So there is a bit of, there is definitely a high level of uncertainty and concern around what the future holds, and largely around the return on investment question. And there is not that great an appetite to immediately jump into an online study program if the return on investment question is not tackled upfront. And many Indian students who are looking at, say, grad or undergrad programs are also very actively applying to high-ranking private universities here in India. We have heard from our network that all of them are experiencing growth in applications and interest from students that are, 3 and 4 times what it used to be pre-COVID. So, parents and students are looking at a plan B just in case the plans to go overseas don't kind of unfold the way they think it would. And by nature, we are quite averse to not kind of spending our time fruitfully when we are studying, engaged in something. We are not great at taking gap year and so on. We go through a very structured, very linear way of finishing our studies. It's an important factor for any institution that is looking to engage with India that they should put into the consideration set. So from the perspective of key challenges that we see for Australian institutions, obviously there is concern around how we are going to kind of come onshore. primarily because all of the missions here have been evacuated. We hear chatter that some of them are going to open in July for biometrics and so on. Earlier this week, the government of India has made a request to various countries asking them to open the missions here so that Indian nationals who are waiting for visas and so on can or are kind of, submitted their passports and haven't managed to retrieve the passports, they can kind of, get some level of move forward. The recovery of various study abroad destinations from the Indian perspective would also kind of be something that Australian institutions should closely monitor. And the interesting thing is that we are already seeing that here in India, the trajectory of recovery for various Indian states will be very, very different. So as of now, we have got two massive hotspots in the west of India and in Delhi, which is where I live and work. All of our key metro cities, whether it be Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Chennai is another big hotspot. They are all having a large cluster of cases. And then there are some smaller states that have done brilliant work in terms of trying to flatten the curve and also getting on top of containing the disease. But as Ramya mentioned in the opening kind of remarks, and Gitesh also said, we are in unlock 1.0. And in that unlock, as we have seen in other countries as well, we are seeing a rise in the number of cases. So the varying trajectories is something that we have to really look out for. In terms of the new opportunities, there is obviously the evolving digital recruitment landscape that has kind of really come to the fore in the last 10 weeks or so. More and more institutions, whether it be local institutions, agency partners, they have all shifted into the online landscape and are doing everything in their powers to keep the institution front and center of the consideration set of all of the students who are in the pipeline. So right now, everybody is very much focused on using all these formats to protect the pipeline in the hope that towards the end of the year, we will have some kind of plan having found a cure for the disease or a treatment regime for the disease, which would enable movement of people. The other interesting thing that we need to bear in mind are the partnership opportunities that are emerging with local institutions here in India. We already have some of our American institutions talking to local institutions to try and see if they can teach students here for a semester, which will enable them to give that face-to-face connect or a cohort experience before they are in a position to fly overseas. And interestingly, the Indian government, the Ministry of Human Resource Development, has become really proactive in encouraging Indian institutions to consider blended learning models and online provisions. Last year, mid-2019, they had allowed a group of 6 institutions to offer some of the programs 100% online. As of last week, the MHRD has asked the University Grants Commission to look at enabling some of the Indian highly ranked institutions to offer more programs in the blended and online format, and are encouraging students to consider that. As Gitesh said in his opening remarks, many of our examinations are currently on hold, and the hope is that our colleges will open in August, but it all depends on how the disease trajectory moves across the country. So there ends my 6 slides. And I'm happy to take any questions, Gitesh, that you might have.
Thank you, Lakshmi. I'm just trying to get used to unmuting myself and trying to reconnect as possible. It was a very insightful, statistics that you shared, and obviously you are trying to heat map the situation from various different stakeholders. I had a question. I'm sure the audience would probably also like to hear from you on that. how have the Australian universities fared in terms of communicating to the international students in India when compared to their peers?
Right, that's a very interesting question, because my view in terms of communication during these times is that um, after the initial kind of catatonic phase that we all went into, not knowing how we are going to cope with this, we have all managed to kind of, get out of that and try and see how best we can communicate with our pipeline. Over communication is probably the phase that we are in, but I don't think it is a bad thing in the present scenario where students and parents have a lot of queries. I think Australian institutions have had initially some challenges around the communication that was coming out as to how the international students would be treated onshore, etc. But I think at an institutional level, in Australian unis have done a fantastic job of communicating how best they are looking out for the students who are onshore, the kind of care that is being given to international students, etc. Because these are all messages that are very, very important when students and parents are taking decisions. And the very fact that Australia has managed to flatten the curve, and other than, of course, the small cluster that has now emerged in Victoria that is getting reported now here in India, other than that, both with Australia and New Zealand, the sentiments in terms of the student population here is very positive, because both countries have demonstrated that it is possible to flatten the curve. It is possible to kind of get back to some semblance of normalcy as we knew it before we went into the lockdown. So I think the future, and obviously Australia was at the frontier when the disease first hit the world. And with its big February intake and its exposure to China, Australia also has been one of the first countries to recover from kind of dealing how and giving the world a few lessons in how you could kind of potentially deal with the disease and what the next phase of this would look like. So from that perspective, I think now there is a sort of a joined up kind of way forward that I see with the government now asking, okay, can we look at hiring chartered planes and bringing students on, and the recognition that international students are very, very important. From an institutional perspective, I think the Australian institutions have done a lot of work in showcasing what the art of the possible is. They, all of their different programs, they are giving taster courses that students can take, sort of like a try before you buy kind of model. All of these things are very, very good in, and they go down quite well with the population, which is very much return on investment focused.
Thank you, Lakshmi. That's going to lead me to the next question. And for the audience, you are more than welcome to drop us your questions, which will moderate and ask the panelists that you would like them to be addressed to. Lakshmi, you represent a very different trajectory of university engagements in the market. You, Sannam S4 becomes partner of universities that actually put a masthead in the market and start building a team. From your perspective, given the challenge, what are the opportunities for the Australian universities, Queensland universities in this, in our case, and is there a best practice from some other geography that you would like them to share and take as a call to action? Because you're seeing the whole market from a very different perspective, and that was the reason for this panel, a very all stakeholders, but from different perspectives.
Yeah, so thanks, Gitesh, for that. Yes, we are in a very privileged position in terms of seeing how different, we are not in an echo chamber. So we see how different countries are kind of flexing to the needs of a very dynamic situation, or not flexing. in some cases. I think the greatest opportunity in this is going to lie in the expansion of interested student pool, primarily because of the way India has had to accept the emergence of blended learning models. They had already emerged, if you ask me, pre-COVID. What COVID has done is that, it has really catalyzed the rate at which, we would adopt that here in India. And the acceptance is now at the highest echelons of power here and decision making here in India, that they are pushing that through. And that there is a real opportunity in that for institutions to identify local universities that they can work with. One, from a perspective of, say, protection of the existing pipeline. Two, in terms of looking at models of delivery that would really expand the cohort sizes. Because India, as we all know, has never done collaborative models like how China has done. And there are some lessons that we could draw from that, much as right now the relationship between India and China is not in a good place. But having said that, India looks at the China model on the education side with a lot of envy and also aspiration. So there is, as you know, the expansion in the Indian higher ed has happened in the private university space in the last decade and a half. And most of those, many of those institutions are led by individuals who understand what internationalization looks like and what it takes to kind of implement internationalization. And there is appetite there has always been appetite amongst our private universities, but now even public sector institutions are waking up to the reality of blended models. And I think that is going to expand the cohort sizes. As you know, India has always been the second largest MOOC market. But this now, with mainstream education also now looking at this mode of delivery and the various different approaches to that, I think there will be an explosion of numbers. Maybe they will not pay the kind of dollars that we are looking at them to pay for face-to-face education, because there is distinctly a hesitation among students and parents to pay the same level of fee that they would have ended up paying for face-to-face instruction for online delivery. And that is a reality that you have to put in the mix. But if you are nimble and you are thinking ahead and you are forward looking, then you would look at that as an opportunity to expand your cohort sizes from here.
Thank you, Lakshmi. On this audience, we have representation from almost every university in Queensland and a lot of other providers. So I'm sure they are listening to those words of wisdom. And thank you for your time. And I'll look forward to some more questions coming from the audience for you, Lakshmi. We now move on to a very interesting person on the panel, someone whose company recently provided a wonderful report on student mobility of India. And very highly ranked within that report was a parameter on why students choose to go to universities where they go out of their own country, and that was reputation. Well, Jason Newman, our next panelist, is from the QS Intelligence Unit. He's the Vice President for the QS Intelligence Unit and Commercial Director for QS Australia and New Zealand. And I think he knows quite a bit of you on the audience, as he has friends in the industry. He's got QS Intelligence has been for the 20 years collecting institutional data, and the portfolio of research projects include the QS World University Rankings in existence since 2004. The QS World University Rankings has been chosen as one of the new indicators added to the Global Innovation Index 2013, released in July 1st, 2013, and is the only ranking of its kind to be used for the study. Based in the QS London headquarters in London, Jason has worked in events and promotions for the last 22 years, and specifically in the international education for the past 12 years. In fact, he celebrated his 50th birthday. Sorry, Jason, I let the age out in Melbourne last year. He has run a portfolio of international student recruitment products and services that include undergraduate and postgraduate recruitment fairs, publications, and websites. He was part of the launch team for QS Star Ratings and has been instrumental in development of the QS IGAUGE products and services. He's a regular speaker at international higher education events, including AIEC, NAFSA, QS Apple, and CBIE. But when not working, he has a passion for running, horse riding, and travel. Jason, I'd like to hand it over to you. Take it over.
Good morning, a very good morning, very early good morning from the UK. And Gitesh, thank you very much for the introduction and outing of my age. Yes, we'll move on from that rather quickly. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. And as was indicated, I've spent much of my working career in higher education, and in particular in international higher ed. So I'm sure many of you out there, I can't see who you are, but you may know me, and we've probably met at a conference or two somewhere in the world. Today's focus from a QS perspective is going to be data-driven. Most of you will know that we are very much a data-driven organization, much of that coming from the World University Rankings, but also increasingly from a student perspective. So QS runs a number of surveys. Beyond the student area, we run the largest survey of the academic community globally that does feed into the World University Rankings. We also run a very large employer survey, which is the Employer Reputation Survey, again, another feeder into the rankings data. But for today, we're going to focus on some of the student data we have. That's been fed from two parts. Most of you in Australia will be familiar with the International Student Survey, or the ISS, which was part of an acquisition QS made when we acquired Hobson's a few years ago. But probably a little less known to you will be our operations within India. QS has 3 offices, 2 offices in Bangalore and a third office in Mumbai. And we have a partnership with the ERA Foundation. So the QS joint venture with the ERA Foundation in India has created QS IGAUGE. Many of you, as was mentioned by Gitesh, will be familiar with the QS star rating system. And what we have created in our partnership with the ERA Foundation is QS IGAUGE, which is a rating system for local or for the domestic Indian market of colleges and universities. So the data feed coming into my slides this morning, or this afternoon, excuse me, for you guys, is going to be fed from both areas. Some of this will be generic, more global focus. And then we'll dig a bit deeper into some of the Indian responses coming from 2 of these data streams. So I'm now going to share my screen. And okay. So hopefully you're now able to see the slide screen that we have or I have in front of me now. So this is about student mobility trends. Now the data where I'm sharing has been aggregated from various surveys. So a bit similar to Lakshmi's presentation, some of the data, there will be some commonalities there. The predominant focus here are future students at undergraduate level. So a lot of what we're looking here is predominantly looking at an undergraduate focused future student base. So what we're looking at, as I mentioned, is data coming from various sources. To start with, we're going to be looking at student data or future student data coming from the International Student Survey. And clearly we can now see here that 55% of the respondent rate and the total respondent rate for the overall global International Student Survey is 50,000. That data will be aggregated. We will be cutting down into some of the Indian data, and then we'll focus on our IGAUGE data shortly. But we can see that 55% COVID-19 has impacted their plans to study overseas, and deferring is now very much on the agenda. If we can see here the role in the management or the perception of management of the crisis, clearly New Zealand has shot ahead there with 28% of the respondents talking about New Zealand performing well in the management of the crisis, with both the UK and the US down there at the bottom with 2%. Interestingly, we have our audience here for Australia is a 5%. So clearly there's quite a dynamic and quite a shift and a large gap between New Zealand and Australia from from down under in terms of the perception of the management of the crisis. Now, has the pandemic management resulted in the students reconsidering the study destination choice? The answer to that is yes, at 54%. But just to reiterate, this is the global data set. This isn't purely based on India as yet. I think it's interesting as well, and again, just reiterating what Lashmi was saying, that we've got exactly the same sort of data coming through when it looks at the online area. So here we have students interested in beginning their first year online at 47%. We have a 64% level of interest for the first 6 months being taught online, and 75%, the highest rate, is for the first 3 months. But obviously getting into the classroom and getting on campus is still the priority. Tuition fees and online is another hot topic that my previous spokesperson covered. And here, when we ask the question, student views on whether tuition fees should be discounted for online education, 78%, and this is the global, not just Indian student focus, 78% believe that they should be discounted. To the right, I don't need to go through each one because I've got quite a few slides, but just as a sample there, 21% of the total believe that the fees for online education should be discounted somewhere between 21 and 30% for that component of their study. Now, this is the Indian student data cut now coming from the International Student Survey. I just need to keep highlighting that because I am using 2 different survey sources. The numbers now drop to 1,729 respondents. So we can see here that when students expect to begin their studies overseas, by 2021, 55% or just over 55% of that sample plan to be studying overseas in 2021. 18% are still hopeful for this year, and this data has been aggregated between February and May of this year. So the data is obviously aggregated over a period of time. So some of these numbers will need to be dug into a little bit further. Has COVID impacted on their decisions to study abroad? 61% say yes. So clearly again, and from an Indian perspective, that has had a serious impact. So the impact, again, this is all talking about the Indian student perspective, impacted their decisions to study abroad. 65% now intend to defer or delay their entry until next year. Is the main message being pulled from that question. I think this is where we start to see some interesting areas. So the areas that Indian students are seeking assistance for higher education. I've just seen a typo, so no need to put that on your questions. I have spotted it. Assistance for higher education. So here, clearly funding and scholarships is coming out on top. And then the choosing of a study destination is also where they will be seeking assistance. We can then look at researching their study programs and then how to prepare the admission exam. How interested are the Indian students to pursue higher education online due to COVID? Here from the total source we've got is 46% are not interested at all. A further 17.7% are slightly interested, and there is somewhat level of interest coming from 20%. So again, I think that just concurs with the previous presentation that the online area, there's a bit of work to be done to convince the market to move in that direction. We were then asking the question around the information students expect to see on admissions from the universities during the current crisis. And up there at the top are changes to their application deadlines, changes to the application process, and restrictions on the number of international students that universities can enroll. So I think this slide is quite interesting, and I think it should be playing part into that messaging that is being done from universities. Another survey that I haven't had the data aggregated from, but does seem to be white noise. It seems to be coming out quite a bit. There's a lot of messaging, and a lot of messaging is starting to become quite confusing. So I think clear messaging is going to be very important, and taking some of the strands from this particular slide, I think could be quite beneficial from an institutional perspective in helping students or the future students with those challenges. So then we look at the outlook for students from the online teaching and learning space. Again, an area that's very close to the QS portfolio. We do a lot of work in online, the rating system. We provide a lot of audits now in online teaching and learning. And we also have the Reimagine Education Conference, which is an EdTech focused event that takes place each year. So this is a really core area of interest for QS. So students are interested in beginning their new academic year online. So 34% are saying they would be interested starting that learning in an online environment, but a whopping 37% is a no. Again, students interested in the first 6 months of the course to be taught online. Again, these are kind of mirroring what the global footprint says, but again, this is the Indian focus, and 47.5% again is a no. 32%, however, would be interested in starting the first 6 months of their studies online. And the question asks for the first 3 months of their course to be taught online. That increases to 68%, slightly lower than the global average, but these are the numbers coming out of the survey questions asked specifically of the Indian cohort. Again, I'm going to reiterate what our previous presentation was telling us. Tuition fees for online teaching from a student's perspective. So 82% believe that these online courses or components should be discounted. And then we look at the actual percentage that they believe should the reduction be and what that should actually look like in terms of the tuition fee. And I guess there's a large 22 or 23% believe that reduction should be between 41 and 50% of the fee. And a further 20% believe that should be between 31 and 40%. Again, this data will be available for you guys after the presentation, and we can aggregate the data more. So I'll be happy to talk to anybody offline or online about how we can dig deeper into this data. And incidentally, we are able to also run pulse surveys on specific areas. So we have a number of students across the globe, again, as well as in India, where we can run a pulse survey on their sentiment with specific questions that you may be looking to have answered. QS, as I said, runs a partnership and a joint venture with the ERA Foundation, and the 2020 Mobility Report and the impact of COVID-19 has now been published. This can be obtained by visiting qs.com, where you will be able to download this and many other white papers and thought leadership that we've been publishing, particularly during the crisis, on these surveys. So we can see here that the data that I'm going to start to share with you now is coming from the group of students that we surveyed from the iGauge. Again, focused purely on India. The numbers here shift to 7,200 is the source. We asked the question, we were looking at STEM students versus non-STEM students. There isn't a huge amount of difference, but the change in decision to study abroad by Indian students is 51% said it will not, the study abroad plans will not be impacted, but 48% have said yes. Change in decision for study abroad, we're looking here that for the STEM students, the numbers were just a bit of a reversal really against the non-STEM students, but 52% of STEM students said their plans have not changed, and non-STEM was at 51%. Another very interesting slide. So we asked some questions of the survey source pool around their priorities. What are the most important factors when studying abroad or in India? Safety comes out #1 when they're studying abroad, and obviously that does fold very closely in with the current crisis. Employability is the second most important, and reputation is third. We go all the way down through university life in 4th place, infrastructure of the institution in 5th, good weather. I found that quite surprising. Coming from the UK, it'd be quite important for me, but it came in at 6th place. Social life 7th, public transport 8th, and nightlife was the 9th most important. So I think really just focusing again on that messaging, safety is a primary when we're targeting students that are looking to study overseas. To the right in the orange, that was the same questions apply, but for those actually planning on staying in India for their studies. And interestingly, weather came out #1. So student mobility dynamics outside of India, when we're looking at both sort of questions, sorry, the countries of interest, and we're looking still the USA at the top there with 30% of that cohort citing the US as the preferred destination, followed by UK, Germany, Canada, and Australia. Again, we asked the same question, but we're now focusing on study within India. By city, and Bengaluru came out top with 31%. So again, when I spoke to my colleagues about that very, very early this morning, before 5 a.m., the decision was made that Bengaluru probably has the best weather in the country. I don't want to get into a debate about that, but that's what the data is certainly telling us. Studies conducted. Sorry.
Up a little. Sorry about that.
Hello. Okay. So some highlights here from some of the other reports that we've produced within India during the crisis from QS IGAUGE, and these are available at qs.com for download, or do obviously contact me directly and I'll be happy to share those with you. And that is the data from QS, and as I said, that is future student data coming in for undergraduate studies.
Thank you, Jason. Just in time, we were stressed a little beyond, but I must mention for the audience that Jason is from the original land of the Queen, and is speaking to us having got up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So we really appreciate you adjusting to the time zonal differences. I had a few questions that I received, Jason, but I'll park them because we have Ravi who's been waiting to have his go. And friends, many of you know Ravi. In fact, most of you know Ravi. He is not just the president of the ARI, Association of Australian Education Representatives in India. One of the only agent bodies promoted by the Australian government departments. He's also a Queensland alumnus from the Bond University, where he passed out in 1991. Ravi is the managing director of Global Reach, a company that has been representing leading universities from around the world for 28 years. He has worked with various international bodies in the development of self-regulatory structures for the industry. His role with ARI has earned him recognition as a major stakeholder in the education export industry. He has, along with ARI, been working with various government bodies through the COVID period. His blogs on education topics, Ravi Lochan Singh, have a significant following. In fact, the first line that says is, "Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high." He's been given an award of Distinguished Alumnus in 2012 by the Australian government. And we'll hear from him because Ravi has usually a very different take on positive possibilities ahead, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. Over to you, Ravi.
Okay, I guess you guys can hear me, see me, all good. Okay, well, I've heard Lakshmi detail her experiences and what she sees as happening in India, and I think one of the highlights of her presentation, of course, was that her survey was done on a weekly or a fortnightly way, and you can possibly see that there's been a level of uncertainty in the market. I'm aware that we are running really short on time. I'm not going to be using any of my slides, and nor will I try to repeat anything that's been said by Gitesh, Lakshmi, or Jason. One thing is very clear is that when we look at a data, we've got to be very aware that in this uncertain period, I mean, uncertainty came out very clearly in Lakshmi's presentation. One of the key things was the mood of a student is changing on a monthly basis. Right in the month of March, when we suddenly saw the lockdowns happen, most of us saw the year 12 exams in India being disrupted and also the university exams in India getting postponed. We first, as ARI, went out and reached out to the universities and suggested that we may consider delaying the July intake. We thought that July intake would take place, but we may have to delay it by a few weeks. But that was the mood in March. And in around April, it became pretty clear that July intake will be impacted very significantly. And that's the time when we started actually suggesting to universities that let's consider the November intake or putting more subjects into the summer semester. And at that time, most of the newspapers in Australia, well, I'm speaking from Sydney because I managed to reach here just before the lockdown took place. Newspapers in Australia at that time were suggesting that the international travel may be impacted right up to 2021. And there may not be any students traveling in without till there's a vaccine or something like that. All these weren't very positive messages to reach the Indian students. Still, most of us back in India, we work through our own offices, and believe me, most of the agencies and your agencies on the ground have had a very tough last few months. Every week we've been trying to engage with our students, keeping the pipeline as warm as possible, feeding in information from both ends, and trying to check their moods. Of course, the surveys put out by Jason or by Lakshmi have their own role. But for us and for most of the agencies, we are in touch with our students on a day-to-day basis. And I can tell you, in around April or May, there were definitely about 25% odd students who were going to be almost ready to start with an online mode before arriving in Australia, and then possibly just needed clarification around the fees or around the post-study work. However, by May, things started changing once again. And I'll tell you, in the last 2 weeks, we have had discussions as ARI with our members in Western India, with members in Nepal, and I don't see more than 5 to 7% of our students taking up any form of online education in the coming semester. Now, well, this just might be the experiences can vary from one institution to another, but when I speak, I'm speaking more generally here. What we are seeing is a slightly changed mood in India. Of course, Gitesh talked about Unlock 1 and Unlock 1.0 or whatever, and obviously we've seen these large numbers of continuing infections in India. But we've got to also keep in mind the population that India has. And so when we break down the total number of infections per million population, it doesn't necessarily look that bad as the total number. Having said this, most of our offices, or at least half of our offices, are back to some form of partial functioning. We aren't really seeing too many students walk into our offices at this point of time, but we are very, very aware that some of those students who were earlier looking at Australia are checking with our counselors on what opportunities might be there in UK or in Ireland or in Canada. And as Lakshmi mentioned in her presentation, some of these countries were pretty quick to come back with their own responses, clarifications around post-study work. But most importantly, in the last 2 weeks, we have seen some clarification coming out from the UK regarding giving an assurance to the students that yes, we will be running the fall intake most definitely. And in fact, there are certain indications that the VFS, which collects the biometric, might start functioning in the next 7-8 days time. Now, all this is the same student. The same student has opportunities to go to study in any of these destinations. In the month of May, almost all countries were impacted equally. But around this time, when the student is either, it's got to go somewhere, the options for us is how long can we keep the students waiting? There will be students traveling. There are students who are looking at going overseas. Large proportion of them will continue to go overseas. Only about 5% students, in my opinion, will drop the plan to go overseas altogether. They will differ. Some of them might look at 2021, the first intake, but there are also some students who started looking around to other destinations. Now, I can share with you that early in June, there was a online or a virtual conference between summit between the Australian and the Indian Prime Ministers. And surprisingly, the Indian Prime Minister actually went out and formally thanked the Australian government for helping and taking care of the Indian students in Australia. I think that was the first real formal kind of statement by the Indian side to any country in the world. And I think this really put out a message back in the students' mindset that things in Australia is actually not bad. and Indian students are very much safe. So if safety is a parameter, then the message really went out that Australia is a safe country. I was a little surprised to see one of the graphs on Jason's about the different countries and where Australia fitted in. My observation is that Australia and New Zealand are being seen as the two safest countries for an Indian student at this point of time. The other thing to bear in mind is that somewhere towards the end of May, the Department of Home Affairs released the data on the total number of students, international students with valid visas who are currently stranded outside of Australia. If you take a look at the data, it's got 125,000 students on it. And only 4% of that total number is from India. And about less than 1% is from Nepal. So when we really look at it and think of South Asia altogether, contributing roughly the same numbers as China, only around 5% of the students from South Asia chose to go back ever since the COVID impacted Australian education. And this is pretty significant because Indian government too has been running its Vande Mataram flights, which they call the evacuation flights, over the last 1 month or 1 month and a half, and hardly any Indian student has boarded those flights to go back. So this is something to bear in mind, that the message back home is that Australia is definitely a safe country to live and stay. Whether the Australian government did enough or they didn't do enough, that's immaterial now. The Indian Prime Minister, who's considered the final word in India, has gone out on record and complimented the Australian Prime Minister on having taken care of the Indian students. And I think that's fantastic. In my opinion, the Australian universities did their role very well, and the Indian community too really came out and helped the Indian students manage if they've lost a part-time job or something like that. Now, where next from here? And I think this is what I want to focus in my few minutes that I want to really use up. From where we stand in the last 5-7 days, students in Bhutan, which I'm mentioning Bhutan because that's where I got this data, have started receiving these emails from Canberra-based universities inviting or seeking their expression of interest about traveling on the pilot flights or on the pilot program, whereby they're bringing the students back, those who are continuing students. And that's given out a very positive message in Bhutan. Now, why I mentioned Bhutan is across South Asia, the experience is not the same in all these countries. And sometimes we tend to cluster it all together. Bhutan has had 0 deaths, and possibly that's one of the reasons why the Department of Home Affairs might have put it in some other bracket. And we've seen a few students receive those emails in the last 2 days. And I think that's giving out a message that yes, travel could start. Now, when I look at that email, it actually gives steps as to who could come in first. Now, we need some of those things happen even with Queensland. I'm aware that Queensland universities have, and the peak bodies have gone out and given a proposal. I'm also aware that interstate borders will finally open between Queensland and other states sometime in July. But we would need the continuing students to return back on the campus sometime in the next couple of months. And if that would happen, again, it will put out a positive message in the market. Some of the Queensland universities also have a third intake this year. There is an intake around September or November. If you can get even small numbers of fresh students or new students coming into those intakes, say the November intake of Griffith or September intake of Bond or some of those other universities, I think it will be a fantastic first move in the market to reassure everybody that Australia is back and functioning and has got a process in place. Now comes the next part of it. Indian students don't need the biometric. Firstly, let's understand this, because the biometrics are required for students coming from Nepal and other countries around India, but there is no biometric requirement for Indian students applying to Australia. So we don't have to be dependent on a body like VFS. Regarding medicals, I'm told that most of the health facilities have started functioning and students have been taking their medical tests. Now visas are not being granted, but visas were never stopped too. You've got to keep in mind that a student can still apply for an Australian visa online. Now the question is getting the act together. And my feeling is that the Department of Home Affairs and the government would be really putting their thoughts together. And if we can get some movement happening with quarantine inbuilt in the next couple of months, and we can get some students still coming into Australia and to Queensland by November, we will be doing very, very well. Now, coming to the other part of it is, of course, we talked about what else. The old formulas are not going to work. And we've got to really, really rejig them all. First and foremost, let's not be in a hope that a lot of Indian students will take on online study and continue on. Online study would have been only 1 or 2 subjects of the 4 subjects and as a way to hang on. Many of them, as one of the surveys indicated, are seeking refunds and deferring to the next semester, because some of them may actually be looking at alternative destinations. And I think being as a parent or even a counselor, I think it's within the student's right to look at all options before them, even despite the fact that Australia is a very, very inviting destination. Third thing that I've actually started doing as AD, and in fact, I can share with you that AD in the month of April put out 10 recommendations to the government. And one of them was around the quarantine as an option, and without waiting for a vaccine, if we can find a process of bringing the students back in. And I think I can share with you that the government has actually got back to AD and complimented or thanked us for the recommendations, and those are being included in by the COVID-19 task force for the consideration. We also went out on the post-study work, as you might have seen, and most of your universities were hoping for some more clarity on the issue of post-study work for more than a month. And we realized that any changes to the post-study work requirements would require legislation. And with no sitting of the parliament happen, and it was very difficult. And I understand how Australian systems work. So we actually went back and suggested to the government that why not interpret your current regulation to allow the post-study work for those who start a course online. And I believe many of you were on the AD webinar, which was hosted with all the 3 departments just about 2 weeks ago. And there was some clarity provided on the issue of post-study work by the Department of Home Affairs. And in fact, in the recent weeks, several universities also reached out to us asking for some more clarity, and we were able to get it for the institutions. Having said all this, I think it's now time to actually pitch in, put our resources together and propose to the government how Australia can be made more inviting in the coming period. One of the things to bear in mind is proposals in UK for longer post-study work. UK, Canada, and New Zealand actually offer 3-year post-study work. And what we need to now remember that last year, Australia had proposed additional years of post-study work for locations outside of Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, when there was a lot more traffic happening to Australia. Now we need to bring the traffic back. And I believe even Brisbane would need an additional year post-study work to be attractive to an international student considering to come to Australia. So I think some of those things which were worked out last year may not be as valid in as we enter 2021. 2021 business, personally, I'm looking at close to 50% of what we had in 2019. And I think that's fine. That's still fine. That'll still keep us afloat. What we really need to put together is how to really attract students back to Queensland and back to Australia. And for that, our proposition to the student has to be more attractive than just saying that we contain the virus. In a month from now, all the major destinations would have contained the virus. So, of course, the advantage that we have right now may not exist. I think I've gone well beyond my 10 minutes, Gitesh. You can take on, and if there's any question you want to pose to me, I'll answer that. Probably that might be the better way to do it.
Thank you, Ravi. And I just got a message from Jason that he might have to leave for another meeting. Jason, we might ask you to just hang around a little bit more. If there are any questions to the
no problem.
Ravi, you actually covered all the questions I had planned to ask you. You were as passionate as ever. You have definitely had thoughts that were conveyed back by me as well. And I think I might have to request everyone to go on mute.
Gitesh, can I say one more thing? I just saw a question pop up, and that was part of what I was going to talk about, the vet sector. I think this is very important to actually lobby for post-study work for the TAFE sector too. In fact, in your presentation right in the beginning, you talked about the slipping rupee to a dollar. The Australian dollar is now at 52 rupees plus. It was almost 45 rupees about a month ago. This is making Australian education dearer with time. And TAFE, I would believe that 2 years of TAFE should be given a fair go at this point of time. And this is something which should be part of any lobbying effort because Australia is the only country where the post-study work is linked to a degree. In Canada or in New Zealand, you could still do a diploma and you could still get a post-study work. So we've got to keep that in mind very clearly. And in a market from South Asia, post-study work is the key driver towards choice of a destination. I saw it didn't figure on the Jason's graph, but maybe the survey was done across not just students going overseas, but across the student population. And Lakshmi might be able to add to it, post-study work is the key driver why there is a number suddenly going up for UK, or it happens for any other destination. And if we really need to make Australia attractive in future, we've got to really tighten our post-study work requirements so that return on investment can be covered. Permanent residency is not as important at this point of time as bringing in return on investment. Sorry, I just couldn't stop myself from getting back on this.
No, thank you, Ravi. That was very passionate. I was just going to ask one question to all the panelists as we see some of the audience, I think, are leading us now. One sentence that you could say for Australian education providers to relook at international education in the current scenario and also for the future. It could be a refresh, a reboot, it could be a restart. So if there could be one sentence from each of the panelists, it'll be fantastic.
I think reimagining the value of education, because there is a lot of question around what value is higher education to a student. So reimagining that value and delivering that value to the student, and no student will walk away if there is they see value.
Fantastic. Reimagining the value. Excellent. Jason?
I would concur with that. I think it's the value proposition, it's the experience, the student experience, value proposition, and just, I mean, I know our data may not always be aligned, but employability and safety. It's also the messaging that you want to present. I think getting very clear and concise messaging, and as I explained, and I wish I had a bit more data to support that today, I don't, but what is coming through is there's a lot of white noise, and that's getting very difficult for individuals to actually cut through the noise and actually get the real messaging that's coming out.
Thank you, Jason. So employability and safety is what we pick up from you. Ravi?
I think being able to react to a situation quickly. I mean, of course, the old formulas don't work, as I've just mentioned. We can't really plan now for 2035. That's the plan that Peter Varghese gave for India. 2035, come on, we never budgeted for a COVID-19 to happen in it. And one of the big points which came out from that report was that India is going to be very important for Australia. But 2035, we need a plan for 2021 and 2022. I mean, 2035 is too far. We'll probably have 3 COVID-19s between this and that time.
Thank you. So Ravi, I pick up the fact that look now, look at a strategy from now for the immediate year ahead. Well, we had quite a few questions that we had on our plate, and a few are appearing from the audience. Because of time, I might not have it. I just want to share some of the opportunities we think that exist for Queensland education sector in India. And if I may request everyone to just be on mute once, and I'll share this. Can you just make the slide bigger? Given the fact that online education is, the strategy that's happening right now, one of the, India is very important to Queensland. We are the second largest source market. So some of the opportunities we think that exist for the sector in India, and the panelists are welcome to give us their viewpoints. One is providing online education content in the changing paradigm of a blended learning mode. Training teachers to teach online, because Indian teachers are not equipped. That could be a value addition that Lakshmi is alluding to maybe. Modern syllabus and skill development, vocational training and industry tailored upskilling courses, something that Ravi also took up. If that could be a way we could bring a value proposition, employability that Jason is alluding to. Can we do some courses for schools and universities promoting entrepreneurship, leadership and innovation? Again, employability that we are touching base with. I think whichever geography brings those values to the nation will look up to that geography in a much more favorable way. More importantly, because of the expertise that exists and the intent and the need that exists right now for a reboot of innovation, we believe there are opportunities in research and development, which is, it could be academia to academia, it could be commercialization of IPs that exist in Queensland universities, it could be industry and academia collaborations for employability of returning students. Not every student that goes to Australia and Queensland would stay there, they would want to come back. And of course, commercialization of IPs is something we find that India can really connect with. So there is a new set of way forward that's emerging within the challenge time that we have, which probably goes to the second life of student, when the student has done the courses, where it could be employable in India or in Australia, whether they can add value in India or in Australia, and so on. So this is what we want to bring to table. But thank you so much, panelists, to Lakshmi for bringing that fortnightly reading that you're doing of the temperature of the industry and stakeholders. Jason, for a fantastic breakup that you as a global ranking intelligence unit does to find out what the students across the world are thinking, where the whole world is planning to move or not move. And Ravi for keeping the head above without the fear that the experience of another country, the cultural experience, the knowledge experience, the vocational experience of another country would still keep the fires and interest for all the people to still travel to Australia and in Queensland to other geographies. If I may just ask Ramya to bring up the last slide in case anyone would like to contact us. This webinar would be recorded and presented on TIQ's website. We will have an optional feedback survey to you shortly. The contact details for me and Ramya are on the screen, and the next session is happening with our Latin American colleagues and my commissioner there, Alex, which is on the 1st of July, which is Challenges, Trends and Opportunities in LATAM. Thank you everyone for your time. Ravi, you've been fantastic as always, and some of your ideas are already being picked up by DFAT, and you can see that in the outreach by ANU and other universities. Jason, your reports have been phenomenal in upgrading our own knowledge of what the student temperature is across the world. And Lakshmi, a fantastic input because you're actually measuring what's happening on the ground from all stakeholders. So thank you once again on behalf of Study Queensland and on behalf of Trade and Investment Queensland, I, Gitesh, and my colleague Ramya, who's done so much. And Tristan, thank you for holding this together. Truly appreciate it. And all the audience who took out time to join in, we do hope this was value that you were looking for. Thank you. Stay safe, stay healthy, and enjoy life while we have it. Thank you.